We are on the grounds of the Biltmore Hotel in Santa Barbara, and I have the distinct honor of interviewing for our program Kate Braverman. I hope that all of you are familiar with Kate Braverman's work, but if you're not, I'm going to tell you a little bit about her, and because I like to get it expressly precise, I will read from her bio. Kate Braverman is a poet and fiction writer who lives in Los Angeles. She's an associate professor at Cal State University. She's the author of 2 novels, Lithium for Medea and Palm Latitudes. And her most recent novel, about which we will be talking quite extensively, is entitled Wonders of the West. And I hope that you'll have a chance to see this sometime in your travels, pick it up and read it. I've read some parts of it, and I can tell you I'm not much of a fiction reader, but I find the style of it very fascinating. One of the reasons I'm so fascinated by Kate Braverman's style is that she sort of weaves poetry into her prose writing. Is something that I'm very interested in and intrigued by, and it became immediately apparent to me as I started to read that this is her style of writing. So I think that if you haven't been introduced to Kate Braverman, I hope that you will take the opportunity to do so for yourself. But for the next hour, I hope you're going to sit back and enjoy finding out more about this very interesting writer. Before I go to Kate, though, I want to tell you just a little bit more about some of the things that she's written. She has written a book of short stories called Squandering the Blue. She's also written several books of poetry, including Milk Run and Season of Women. She has in the past been a book reviewer for the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner, and she's had short stories and poems appearing in such publications as Lear's Magazine, the Los Angeles Times, and the Paris Review. Tales of the Mekong Delta. I'm going to get that right. Tall Tales of the Mekong Delta, which is a short story from Squandering the Blue, won the O. Henry Award in 1991, I believe. Is that correct, Kate?
1992.
It was 1992. She's a frequent speaker on college campuses, and of course we're pleased to have her here in Santa Barbara. She's here on a reading tour for Ballantine Books. She's married, her husband is Alan, and she has a daughter. And from here forward, we're just going to explore with Kate the meaning of her life and her writing. Welcome
Great.
To Santa Barbara.
Hi, it's great to be here.
And thank you for agreeing to be on Outrageous Women.
I want to be outrageous now.
You are outrageous. That's the criteria. You have to already be outrageous.
Okay.
And one of the things that we try and do with Outrageous Women is to sort of expose the lives of women who are outrageous or who are doing outrageous things. And in this way, we sort of allow other women and viewers of our show to see what it means to be outrageous, and also to hear how one gets
about doing it?
Well, gets to manifest their life as an outrageous person.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things that I've learned about you, well, I probably should have mentioned in your introduction that you were our featured poet at our first annual Santa Barbara Poetry Festival in 1992.
It was a beautiful event, and I'm glad that you're going to be able to do it again.
Yeah. And so, as such, I knew a little bit about you and had an opportunity to meet you then, but we didn't get to sit next to each other at dinner.
No.
And so this is my opportunity to get up close and personal with Kate. But I know you have a tremendous following, a huge audience of people who admire your poetry, and I imagine that the fiction and the prose fans are a little more. It's a little more subtle group to identify.
I really don't know who's reading my work.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I've been all over the country, and people tell me they read my novel Palm Latitudes in women's studies classes, and that it's American fiction writing, contemporary California women's writing, so it's being taught on colleges all over the country, that novel in particular, and my short stories, including Tall Tales from the Mekong Delta. What I do is I put all my poetry now into my longer fictions, and I do this for several reasons. For one thing, it's almost impossible to publish poetry, even when you've already done collections of poetry, and even when you sort of have a reputation. If you don't play the game right, if you don't act right with the academic establishment, it's almost impossible to publish poetry.
just give us a few clues as what playing the game right might entail.
Well, it means you go and you get an MFA, a Master's of Fine Arts at a writing program school like Stanford or Iowa or Irvine or Columbia, one of these schools that gives out these MFAs, and then you get to get a job in a different MFA program teaching other poets to become so-called accredited poets. And then you get to publish your poetry in journals run by other people in other MFA programs. In other words, these chairmen of English departments are like feudal warlords. You know, you sort of have to get them to stamp your papers before you can move on further along. And I decided I would prefer to take my chances with the marketplace rather than to have to play that sort of game. If I slowed down that much, I would get an aneurysm, you know, so I just feel I can't do that.
So, but you have been teaching.
No, I resigned my position, as a matter of fact. I got out of debt and resigned my position.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, you know, someone told, I think I've read, and I feel that some of us are operating under the premise that the very best way to support yourself as a poet, to be able to do the work, is to have a job teaching poetry, and therefore you have lots of time between classes to write.
Well, you don't have any time between classes. With the California budget crisis, I found that you're constantly having to take meetings about whether they should raise the parking fees somewhere, and people are willing to like fight to the death over this, apparently, because they have no other brain activity and they're not really producing much. There was no janitorial service at the school I was at. It was very dirty. The elevators didn't work. Everyone seemed to be completely demoralized, and everyone had the soul of a postal worker. Do you know?
I'll make
it was
sure
just
I send
like,
a copy of this interview down to you.
Thank you. They were just like shuffling around in a daze, collecting their government paychecks. And I'm sort of concerned about having art that comes out of people who are having government paychecks. And I think one reason why we don't have any work in this country, any work about what it is to have the struggles of being a blue-collar worker, you never read about that. I don't in modern fiction, because all of our fiction is written by, I'm talking particularly about women's fiction, is by women who are tenure-track professors, and they write about being a professor or being the wife of a professor and lunching and shopping. And I have said that I believe that women who are still doing this close to the millennium should have their kneecaps shot off.
Well, you're talking to someone who I recently fell and may have permanently damaged my kneecap.
So you see how painful it is.
Yeah, I know how painful it is, and I'm wondering now whether it's some sort of blessing that's come to me to make me move in a different direction.
Well,
you may be pronouncing the reason for my fall.
I just, I feel like working class struggles never make it onto the page because the people who get to write now don't have working class struggles. I was a single mother for 8 years. I had a baby alone, and I was a writer. I wrote Palm Latitudes, my second novel, with an infant. And I happen to know that the sound of one hand clapping is a woman holding a baby in one hand and a pen in the other. And struggles about being divorced and worried about how you're going to pay the rent and how you're going to survive in the urban savagery are things that just don't seem to adorn American literature at all.
Well, you know, this is a continuing criticism of the literature of America, the American idiom, so to speak, and that is
by who? Not by academics.
Well, maybe because I deal a lot with the writing of African American women who have this as you know, a part of the conversation that goes on at panels and on the telephone and.
So I guess it's in ethnic studies that you hear it, because you really don't hear much of it in the mainstream criticizing itself for not being working class enough.
I'm not even saying in ethnic studies because I am not a formal part of the academic scene, but I do participate in the popular culture, and I do try and read the essays and hear the talk show comments that are made by African American writers and other women writers, and certainly the criticism about, for instance, the perspective of the writers. And that being providing such a bland landscape of America.
Isn't it a bland landscape of lifeless, lunching and shopping?
So much of the reality of America is not in the literature, that people go around the literature. I was just at a conference a few days ago where we were talking about when most people fill out some sort of survey, they checked off, this is some survey that was done this past year, they checked off that they did not participate in the arts. Yet, when they go to a movie, they don't consider that as an art. But we, certainly we consider filmmaking as an art. And so that people tend to go to movies because movies reflect something about their lives. And the degree that they do reflect something about their lives. They come out of, they may find something that reflects the sensibility that they live in or that they can relate to or they can identify with. Less so than they can in books, and I think that's probably why they watch soap operas and don't read books.
Well, I can't address that issue, Sojourner, because I don't go to movies and I don't watch television. I have absolutely no interest in visual images. I think the society is completely bombarded with visual images. What I'm concerned with is what I see my role as being increasingly is I'm trying to expand the roles that women can play on the page. I feel very restricted with the roles that women inhabit. It's like they're sort of peripheral characters. Most of all, they have to be good girls. They have to accept the status quo, and they have to be bourgeois. And they have to accept everything that goes into being a bourgeois thinker. And I've always worked against that. In my first novel, Lithium for Medea, my main character was a drug addict. And I'm sick and tired of how men who live self-destructive lives are considered romantic heroes. They're living the mythic poet's life. But when a woman lives that same kind of life, she's looked at as being a victim, as someone who couldn't cope. In other words, her self-destructive lifestyle is not looked at as being romantic and lyrical and part of being a poet. For instance, take the 19 posthumous years it took for Sylvia Plath to get her Pulitzer Prize, because everyone knows that she left behind 2 children when she committed suicide. But what about the men of this century? The Robert Lowells and the John Barrymans and the Hemingways. How many children did they leave behind? They're never accountable for that. So I've been trying to work against certain stereotypes. Women are still stigmatized if they have a problem with drugs or alcohol, whereas with men, it's part of the glamour of being an artist. So that's something I've been working at in my writing. I worked on that in Squandering the Blue. Now in Wonders of the West, this is a very simple coming-of-age story. And the reason that it's not recognized as being a coming-of-age story is we don't have girls' coming-of-age stories. It's just like my character, my protagonist, Jordan Lerner, says, there's nothing for her to read. She says, there's nothing for me to read. It's all about boys going on hunting trips or playing polo in Connecticut. Here she is growing up as a latchkey child of the shabby streets of Los Angeles in the early 60s. And there's nothing for her to read. And it's interesting, lo, these many years later, almost 30 years later, telling this story is still working in a frontier.
Well, I agree to.
Do you know?
I do agree to some respects, except that I have found things to read, and but I haven't found enough to read that makes me read it on a regular basis. It's just from time to time you come across something.
But reclaiming girlhood. See, I was trying to reclaim my girlhood. I think women sort of exist on the page now as adults, and there's sort of moments when they exist in their crystallized adult personas. But what about girlhood? I think that's still a great frontier to write about.
Well, I guess I don't know that there's not some out there, but I definitely trust your sense that there's not.
I don't think there's much.
I think that just reminds me of a poem by Denise Levertov where she talks about 2 girls sharing a secret. The secret we shared, only the 2 of us looked and knew that it was a secret that the 2 of us shared, and it's about 2 teenage girls. I like that little poem. But now, as a poet, and I understand that it took you a long time to get Palm Latitudes published.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how you stuck to your commitment to that project and what happened.
Palm Latitudes was a book that I was willing to die for. There are certain moments I've found in my career, long moments in fact, when death has seemed sort of part of what was required. Talk about outrage, talk about an outrageous profession. I found that being a poet and a woman in modern America in Los Angeles and Southern California, a region that doesn't exist as far as the New York publishing establishment, the Anglo male seaboard way of thinking just does not recognize these colors and textures and fragrances, this vegetation, this climate, this Southern California. So I wrote Palm Latitudes. I was a single mother. I was on a schedule where I would write all day, write all night, write all day, sleep 4 hours. I kept that up for a year and a half. And I felt I might very well die writing this book. And I began to look at it as a survival textbook for my daughter. Should I die? Right down to it has menus that you can cook for dinner parties. It has reading lists in it. And I thought I gave it the 110% effort. That book is smarter than I am. My main character, Marta Ortega, knows more about the world than I do. And what happened was it took 4 years to get the book published. It was rejected by 30 publishers. I got letters back from agents and editors that said, this very well may be a tour de force, but you can't expect us to believe that Mexican women who did not go to college could have these thoughts. Someone said that.
My.
And I would reread parts of the book that I knew to be truly splendid writing. And I went bankrupt. I lost my house. The book was so vast, I had to carry it in a hat box. And I was laughed out of Los Angeles, and 4 years went by.
What gave you your, where did your strength of purpose, where did your stick-to-itiveness come from? Why is it that you didn't give up after 15 rejections?
Well, it was more rejections. It ended up being about 30 for this book that Time magazine ultimately called me the voice of the region for. Why didn't I give up? I almost went mad. I really did almost lose my mind. I would read parts of the book that I knew were working so well. Palm Latitudes has hundreds of poems in it. Whenever I didn't know what to do, it's a very long and complex book, I would just throw another poem in, and the poems would flare up. They would be like illuminations in the ghastly darkness of writing this multi-generational saga. How is it that I didn't give up? I don't know how I didn't give up. I think I sort of did give up. I didn't write for about 3 years. Took long walks in the country, got very quiet with myself.
But through it all, you seem to have had, I sense that you must have had this idea that eventually this book would out, and that it didn't matter that 10, 15, 33 people said no.
I don't think anything can ever make that up to me, the pain that I went through. So I don't know that I have a positive thought about that. It was really quite accidental that book ever got published.
What was the accident?
Well, it was a friend of my hairdresser's. My hairdressers finally said to me once, you're so constantly sad about this. Maybe I can help you. I know so many people. I said, sure, here, take it. It was in a hat box. And he gave it to someone who gave it to an editor in New York who ultimately purchased it. That editor then passed on my next book of short stories, Squandering the Blue. He wrote me a letter. He said, these stories are so bad, they're literally unspeakable. You are to withdraw them from publication. We will pretend it never happened. We'll never mention it again.
Where does that audacity come from?
Why did he have to take so extreme a position? That was something I always wondered about. But my work seems to produce in people a sense of great feeling of being very intimate with me, or a sense of wanting to savagely and brutally punish me. I seem to really stir great emotions in my readers.
I read the first beginnings of Wonders of the West.
Wonders of the West.
Roxanne, and let me see, okay, now I'm going to get these characters right. Jordan Lerner.
She's the daughter.
Is a teenager who's in high school. It opens. She's in high school. And she's being made to take all these home ec classes. And she's
typing, sewing, and cooking, and she refuses to do that.
I had the exact same experience with trying to make a skirt when I was in 10th grade. And I had some plain blue fabric, and it was supposed to be pleated. And you lay all the pleats out with the pins, and finally a week before the quarter's over, I had to take all the pins out and gather the skirt. And so it was just totally like, why am I doing this? I have to do this just to get a grade in this class, because this is not my interest at all.
But if you recall, the 60s is really one of the characters in Wonders of the West. And we must remember, we didn't always have this egalitarian, non-racist, non-gender oriented free of class prejudice society that we have now. Oh no, things used to be truly repressive. And if you were poor, as I was, economically distressed, and you were female, it went without saying that you would sew and type and cook. This is what you would learn to do. And the idea that Jordan Lerner refuses to do this is perceived as delusional behavior, for which, I don't know if you're old enough, Sojourner, to remember, you could be put in a structured environment. In those days, if you didn't have the right attitude, if you appeared to not be coping, they could put you in a state facility.
Well, where I came from, they said, we're going to send you off to the reformatory.
Yes, reform school.
We're going to take a break right here, and we're going to come back and find out more about Jordan Lerner and yourself, Kate, and myself, and find out where our paths intersect along this trek of life.
This is early in the novel when Jordan Lerner is 17 and she's being tortured by her high school guidance counselor, Mr. Gordon, and this will give you a little bit about the tenor of her life. My teachers despise me because I live in the courts. I have a 157-point IQ, and I repudiate them absolutely. I respond to them as if they were trying to poison me, and they know it. They are trying to give me radiation sickness of the soul, and they're going to have to put me into restraints to do it. My teachers think it's a waste of an IQ to give it to someone from the courts. The kids in Palm Courts end up leaving the district. We get sent to relatives in Kansas City or Stockton when our parents die. We go to youth authority, mental hospitals, and foster homes. We go to reform school and trade tech. We go to buy a loaf of bread and never come back. We erase ourselves. We vanish. It begins when the kid's mother breaks down. That takes a year, sometimes a year and a half. Every morning the mother wakes up at 6, puts on her secretary clothes, the tight pink skirt her boss says he likes, and the white high heels. She polishes her shoes while she boils the water for instant coffee, if it's early in the month, if there's still money for coffee. Then she walks to the bus stop. She walks because the car has been sold. Now she files and types and answers telephones. She has to be careful to keep her voice cheerful. If the boss thinks she's crying during her coffee break, he'll fire her. Then she comes home and puts nail polish on her fingers. She smokes too much and her hands shake. She makes the bag lunches for the next day. She sets her hair. She gets thinner. She thinks maybe she should take a pill for pain. Her eyeglasses break and she doesn't buy new ones. Why should she? Then she begins to collapse. It doesn't happen all at once. Maybe her boss told her to wear the straight pink skirt to work without panties. He likes her to sit on the edge of his desk, stir his coffee, keep her legs spread. If she doesn't comply, she will be dismissed. He has her lean against the side of his desk while he tells her this. He touches her thigh underneath her skirt with his pen without looking directly at her, as if it wasn't really happening. How can she be sure? That's when she develops the migraines. She starts throwing up. That's when the fathers and brothers start drinking. That's when the daughters begin to drift away. They are leaves in a bad season. They know this. Then they are gone. Even with your family problems, college is not entirely outside the realm of possibility, Mr. Gordon, my guidance counselor, says. Not entirely outside the realm of possibility, I repeat to myself. I consider the split atom in the black holes of space. Do you think about college? Mr. Gordon wants to know. I shake my head no. What about cooking and sewing? Aren't those skills you'll need as a wife and a mother? Mr. Gordon asks me. I decide to look at his eyes. I am going to risk this. His eyes are a weak blue, a polluted blue, algae by an insignificant lake in a decadent tropical city where the language proved inadequate and has been thrown away. I would refuse to have his children. Won't you have a family to take care of? Mr. Gordon is interested. I say, no. What are you going to do? He looks at his folder. I suppose he's attempting what we in 12th grade English call a dramatic punctuation. Obviously, French isn't part of your plans. I wanted to take Spanish, I reveal. Spanish? Mr. Gordon is suddenly energized. College possibles take French. What would you do with Spanish? I consider the desert wind that blows from the south and east, the charged wind they call a Santana. I like to feel it rub against my flesh. It's a wind from another dimension. It can tell you stories about bridges and acts of insolence and supplication, but you must know how to listen. What would you do with Spanish? Mr. Gordon repeats. It's so close, I realize. I could go there and talk to the people. There is silence. I have said something that induces the end of words. Or perhaps I have accidentally invented a spell. Talk to the people? You mean taxi drivers and maids? Mr. Gordon stares at me. He's angry. There's been nothing written in Spanish since Cervantes. It's almost a dead language. It's a language for people who work in hotels. Are you going to be a maid? I consider this possibility. I envision a hotel I have never seen. There would be a balcony facing the sea. It would be the dusk after the end of prayer. There would be seashells along the shore, slivers of sand dollars, bleached and white like so many severed hands. They would glitter when the moon rose. The sand would seem inhabited. You could get dizzy from picking up so many of them. You could fill entire bags. You could cross borders. Then you could start your own currency. There would be palm trees, and above, like a scraped belly, the sky with its perfumed gas. Mr. Gordon is still staring at me. I'm about to say something. Then the bell is ringing, and I'm moving through the door into the broken sun.
Well, I've heard that phrase before, but it wasn't democracy. It was what everybody was accused of having.
Oh, yeah.
Opinions, yes. So anyway, yeah, we're already talking, and we're back, and I don't know how far we want to go with the idea of reform school, but just the idea that it was thought that girls could go to reform school and be reshaped if they weren't quite doing the right thing to become the women of this society.
Well, to fit into the roles that men wanted them to play and that they expected them to play. What is of interest to me is that I did not write this book with a political agenda. I never write any of my books with political agendas.
But let me ask you to make a distinction here, because yes. I do have the sense that you have an idea of revolutionizing the way thought goes forth.
Well, I think that just to write a book that's not an act of sabotage and revolution is unworthy. Mm-hmm. And I do look at all of my books as being acts of sabotage and revolution.
So you make a distinction between revolution and politics?
Well, having a specific political agenda. I know that my spin on the world is revolutionary no matter what. Mm-hmm. But I don't sit down and say I'm going to address issues of sexual harassment. Mm-hmm. I'm going to address issues of racism. Mm-hmm. I've just internalized all of these concepts during the 60s. Mm-hmm. I am an unreconstituted 60s person. Mm-hmm. And the revolution that occurred for me and for many others during that period of time was not a matter of fashion. It was a matter of irrevocable destiny. And I took certain vows during the 60s that I continue to live by. And they inform my work and they inform my vision. So I don't have to set out ahead of time with, yes, I'm going to look at the way class shapes and deforms people in America. I just try to tell the truth and that's all embodied in it anyway.
Okay, well, and then the idea of looking at, as opposed to just bringing forth what it is you want to express as a writer, to me, the Palm Latitudes, the concept and the theme of Palm Latitudes about women in Los Angeles who live in a certain area, who come from a certain culture, who just are. How do you get yourself into that are-ness or beingness of the novel?
Okay, well, I've always been interested in the dispossessed or the outsiders of Los Angeles. To me, that's the real Los Angeles. To me, I came here not of my own volition. I came here as a child, and it's my hometown. Southern California is where I've always lived, more or less. So for me, it's not about coming here to get a record contract or be in the movie business. That's the minor little part of Southern California. To me, this has always been an immigrant city. When I was growing up in Los Angeles in the 50s, the late 50s, this was a city for people who'd been scandalized in other places. You came here if you were divorced, you were deserted, you came here if you had asthma or you were expected to die during the winter. There were a lot of people who came here because they were sick or they'd gone bankrupt in New York or Baltimore or Chicago or some other city. This was not a city of choice. This was not a region of choice. This was an outlaw, renegade, Dust Bowl sort of end of the trail. There was nothing glamorous about it. It was filled with poorly educated, shabby people.
And then
and then they got worse.
Okay, so what's your description of them now?
Of what Los Angeles is now?
Yes.
Well, I suppose I went back in time to the 50s to write Wonders of the West. All of my books have dealt with some aspect of Los Angeles that is not the traditional one. For instance, my first book, Lithium for Medea, was about artists, bohemian artists on the Venice canals, living out the end of the Jack Kerouac end of the road myth, which was part of Los Angeles. Then there were the Latina women of the barrio of Palm Latitudes. Then there were my drug addicts and alcoholics, single and divorced mothers and women of Squandering the Blue. Now we went back in time to a coming-of-age story of growing up in a stucco tenement on Sepulveda Boulevard. And now what have I done more recently?
No, I just meant how if you had to give the same sort of ranging description of what Los Angeles is in 1993, what are the elements that would make up that description?
I feel like Los Angeles really had a chance to be a city, a space age, the first great city on the new atomic space route. I really thought that this was going to be a portal into the new millennium, but I think Los Angeles missed it. I think that pulse and that moment of destiny has really passed.
It's passed. When I lived in Northern California, I most heard about Los Angeles, that it was a place of non-reality, of people living in sort of a plastic dream, that way out, and that was the distinction. And then I start to hear some of your descriptions that have to do with most people thinking of Los Angeles as being Hollywood or the movie industry, that there is a real there, that there are real people there who've born and raised and lived their lives.
Yes, you grow up there.
Yes.
You go to school there, you take buses there, you get married and divorced, you have abortions there, you live and die there. There's a real city there. And I suppose I'm angry that the real Los Angeles so rarely finds its way into anyone's thinking. I mean, do they really believe that it's just peopled by people with plastic surgery going to parties all the time? Is that what they think of this huge megalopolis?
Well, now, of course, the definition has been, the image has been expanded to gangs in the barrio and drive-by shootings and Watts and
It's always been a
Crips and
dangerous,
Bloods.
yes, it's always been a dangerous and I think unhappy region. To me, it's always been almost like the American dream ruined.
But out of that, though, for me as an African American, there are more African American businesses and entrepreneurs in Los Angeles than any other city in America. There is something in Los Angeles that is much bigger than, Hollywood.
Well, Los Angeles, Southern California is an experimental region.
Mm-hmm.
There is no tradition in Los Angeles. You really can't talk about, oh, well, he comes from such and such family.
Yeah.
Or he went to school at such and such, because nobody really went to a school or comes from a family that matters. Mm-hmm. That's one thing about Los Angeles that is part of how it's the end of the trail, new frontier.
And
all that really matters is who you are now and what you can do now.
One of the things that I'm also struck about is sort of the disconnectedness of the neighborhoods, and that you can be in one block and ask someone, where's the Crenshaw district? And they say, I don't know. I live in this block. I know nothing about anything else that's Los Angeles.
I was thinking about that in terms of, in Wonders of the West, it's about a Jewish family. And they are only so marginally Jewish. These people are so cut off from their roots. I don't know if you read this part, but at one point Jordan Lerner says she wants to go to a temple. Mm-hmm. And her uncle says, Buddhists, Muslims, they have that here? Mm-hmm. And her aunt says, no, she means a synagogue. And her uncle says, oh no, we can't do that. That's for squares. Well, they would never let people like us in. You need a special costume and you need a password.
Because she wasn't Jewish enough? Is that what's the implication?
These people had just grown up completely outside of a neighborhood. Mm-hmm. They'd grown up, they were completely on the margin. And a sense I had about this book and about my own life is that, particularly as a Jewish person, is that to come to Los Angeles where there are no real neighborhoods, mm-hmm. that it would be very possible to sort of fall out of the stagecoach wherever it left you in the dust and have no idea where to go to meet other Jewish people. It's just such a huge region.
Yes.
I don't think that my family had much of a concept of how to practice their religion, such as it was. On eastern seaboard cities or in Chicago or older cities, there were neighborhoods that you lived in. And, we've never really had neighborhoods in Los Angeles, or we certainly didn't as I was growing up. It was all like one vast dust bowl full of displaced people. Mm-hmm. I think the sense of being displaced goes through all of my work, and that was what was in the air. You breathed bad air of people who were abandoned, people who were lost, people who just didn't have a clue as to what to do.
What inspired you, or how did you know that you would be a writer, or inspired you to develop as a writer, or start to identify yourself and define yourself as a writer?
It's really curious as I look back on it, as I have been recently, how I always knew that I was a writer, mm-hmm. how I always knew that words were magical and that I had an ability to cast spells, because I was willing to deform my life and suffer for this and sacrifice for this when I really had very little to show for it, other than the certainty deep within that I was meant to do this work.
At what point did you start to feel that you had, and I don't really want to deal with the idea of arrived, but had somehow another, that moment, that time when you knew that you would in fact, or that the fact of your life was you are a writer, and that there was a total definition and that you wouldn't have to do something else? And
you mean not have to have a day job?
That's kind of it, yeah.
Someone wrote me a very beautiful fan letter, and I wrote back and said, it's great to get these letters one by one, and remember that art is like hand-to-hand combat, and I feel I'm involved still on the level of one reader at a time. Mm-hmm. And what was the question?
Well, it had to do with what moment in time did you decide?
I've never decided.
It's solid now. They can't take this away from me.
I don't feel that way yet, mm-hmm. and I don't think I'll ever feel that way, because what you find is this: there was a time when I would have sold my soul to publish anything, mm-hmm. anywhere, and then your standards of what you would sell your soul for sort of get higher. Mm-hmm. Like I would sell my soul to win the O. Henry Award, or mm-hmm. I would sell my soul for a 2-book deal with such and such publisher. I know a writer that I respect a great deal who was showing me his books one time in the various translations, Japanese, German, French, Italian, and he said, whatever it is, it's never enough. And I'll tell you what's interesting to me recently is I've come to understand that what I want from my work is completely pathological. That what I want my writing to do for me is something that it's not possible to get from my profession. I found this interesting. I have such a psychological need to have my work take care of me in ways that my parents didn't, to give me things I didn't get as a child. And this is completely pathological. And during this tour that I've been on many times in the last 6 weeks, I've had to say to myself, you're responding in a completely pathological way.
So is the concept of affirming your selfhood, your selfness, a part of this need?
Oh, it's so beyond even that. It's about every breath I take. Every aspect of my life goes through a sieve about whether it's for my writing or not. I'm completely disciplined. I've been doing this now professionally for, I know it doesn't look it, but 25 years. It's the main pulse of my life. It's how I measure my worth, and that is really pathological. You know, my worth should be completely independent of what the Los Angeles Times says about my newest book, but it's not.
Because I would, sort of, your sensibility seems to be so irreverent of any of the institutional kind of assessments.
Yeah.
But let's go back again to this idea, because I was thinking of Harper Lee for some reason. Oh, well, I know why, of Harper Lee and Walt Whitman, and the idea that, for instance, Walt Whitman just redid Leaves of Grass over and over and over and over again, and reaching higher and higher levels of perfecting and translating and rewriting on that. And Harper Lee only did To Kill a Mockingbird. And so I'm wondering, at some point, can you say these 4 books or these 7 books, represent my purpose in life, and I don't need to. I don't need to do that anymore. I'm going to do something different, or I'll just be.
That's a really interesting idea, because sometimes I think I'm going to do that. Sometimes I think I would really like to have an apple farm in upstate New York and never write again. But I hear a certain rhythm, and I just don't really know that I could ever stop writing.
Or that you have an idea that you feel you want to go ahead and get that idea.
Yes, and I need to continually somehow validate my existence, even though I have a very fortunate and happy marriage, even though I have a beautiful daughter who has exceeded her circumstances, our circumstances, in every possible way, even though I have more than achieved all the goals I ever set out for. I would say that I'm still pathologically driven to do this work, and probably always will be.
In the 25 years that you refer to, what have you, obviously your publishing record is, extensive, would be considered extensive by,
Well, you always wonder when you look at people who have translations of their work in 60 languages and fills an entire, carved oak study, always there are those greater than you and lesser than you.
But it seems as if, I can relate to that, and I really like the idea of getting translated and being read by more and more people.
Right.
However, there's something about that even that doesn't require you necessarily to do it. Someone else can translate your work. So it's really the more of the, what the new horizons for yourself in terms of the larger task of producing more concepts and ideas and more planes in your mind.
Well, as I continue to develop, then it makes me want to develop characters who have learned what I have learned as a person. I never set out to be a compassionate and understanding and wise human being. I never really cared about that. But somewhere along the line I found out that to make real characters, I would have to change my real life and become a compassionate and wise person. just to make better characters. So perhaps I did the right thing for the wrong reasons.
I saw a reference that you don't watch any of the sort of popular media because you don't want to have this toxic pollution in your body, in your being. And I can. There's something else, a very strong sensibility for me, because sometimes I try and be involved with people because I never want to be desensitized by, just whatever else is over here that's not real. But on the other hand, there are certain things I don't do because I don't want my mind polluted by that. I want to stick to what I consider my thing. Yeah. And but just to get to the idea of how do you develop? How do you what do you use to continually develop?
As a writer?
As a human being?
Well, for me, I used to live a life of chaos and excess. And as time has gone on, I've lived a life of more and more austerity and discipline. And I'm not involved with various other cultural activities like newspapers and magazines and television and movies and following sports teams or rock bands or any of this other stuff, because writing for me is very much like living a religious life. It's like going into a religious order. You go into the walls and the bells ring and you do certain activities at certain time during the day, and you can't just watch TV rather than go out and plant tomatoes. Do you see?
Yes, of course.
It's a full-time, 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week commitment. Writing you cannot do it in 8 hours a day. It's too hard. You have to get in too deep to just do that. You have to train yourself to do it while you're sleeping. You have to be very quiet, I've found. I need to have a great deal of solitude in my life and a great deal of quiet because I have so many voices improvising in my head all the time anyway, and this work is so exhausting. I'm covered in sweat when I finish writing. It's as if I've been doing heavy physical labor, and I feel jet lagged when I leave my study. I feel like I've just come in from the Rome to Lax flight. I feel like I've spent 18 hours hurtling above the air at 40,000 feet. And there's nothing pretty about it, and I have to get used to being in the other world again.
I'm so much in awe here that it's just like the life I would imagine would be so wonderful. I think every writer wants to have that time when they finally can do it, can be it, can live it, can be in solitude.
But it takes your whole life, and it's very difficult, and there's a huge price for it.
Well, we're going to find out a little bit more about it, and we're going to take a little break right now, and we'll pursue that idea again. I'm going to pick it up again. And stay tuned, please. Hi, my name is Sojourner, and I host Outrageous Women, a very special show featuring up-close and personal conversations with people who make Santa Barbara interesting, talking about the issues and topics that we all want to hear discussed. We talk about art, spirituality, self-realization, the cultural politics of our day. You get the picture on KCTV's Channel 19, Mondays from 7 to 8 p.m. and Saturdays from 4 to 5. Check us out. Okay, Kate, we're going to get right back into this for a little while, and I want to ask you about something that was in one of the quotes attributed to you. Someone was interviewing you and asked you, you are a feminist, do you consider your books feminist works? And your response is, when it's recited for you, male critics and men in the publishing industry want their women writers, want from their women writers what they want from their wives. I'm interested in presenting characters that are more challenging, threatening, complicated, and unpredictable. And I chose to pull out that whole quotation because I think it says something about not only the publishing industry, but your take on male and female relationships. So,
I've come up with a new part to that recently. I've come to see that I agree with all that, but the problem is even deeper and more complex and more subliminal. And I think that basically New York publishers and editors do not want to deal with material unless it's about a woman that they want to have sexual relations with. So unless you're presenting them with a character who is blonde and blue-eyed, and perhaps I have a new story where I named her Christina Eastwood, had always been beautiful, is the first line, so that they can relate to this, so that they can see she's Christian, she's from the East, and she's blonde, and she's beautiful. She's somebody I would want to have sexual relations with. Or else it has to be someone like your major professor's wife, who you can imagine taking to tea at the Montecito Biltmore. Do you know?
Yes.
But it has to fit into those two stereotypes. She can't be too crazy. She can't. I have a character now in a short story I just wrote in a novella about a 240-pound woman who has 6 PhDs and has chosen to fix VCRs for a living in Santa Monica.
But you know,
and she was very hard to publish because if I had made her blonde and green-eyed and thin, but with everything else in place, I think that story would have been very easy to publish.
would you ever publish do your own publishing? Would you ever be a publisher yourself?
Never. First of all, you have no credibility when you vanity press, when you do things yourself, and increasingly, I don't know if you've noticed this in Santa Barbara, but certainly in Los Angeles, is the real bookstores, the independent bookstores, are all going out of business. It's very hard to continue even to function as an independent bookstore, and those would be the only bookstores that would ever carry a self-published press. So your problems with distribution and being reviewed would be so enormous that it would not be worth it. So no, and you'd never get reviewed as a vanity press.
Well, I take it that your response is coming from that of being an established writer, published by established publishers. But there are many women who have taken the option of not necessarily of creating their own publishing company, small presses, writing their stories the way they want to write them, getting them out some way. They don't meet with the mainstream sort of evaluation that you're referring to, but it satisfies their need to write their lives and to have them read by other women.
Well, I suppose this goes back to the pathological drive I have. My husband calls it to send out my frenzied transmission, that I want to send it out to the world. I don't want to ghettoize my work. I don't want to just write for a small group of people who think the way I think, like a Berkeley Women's Collective. I want to continue to engage the New York establishment in this act of revolution. I mean, I don't feel I would be continuing my acts of sabotage if I just sat at home and sent these things off to people that I felt were willing and happy to receive them. I'm going to continue to force the issue.
I can just envision this big, massive cross-continental struggle from that carries forth between you and New York. Back, it's kind of like tangling with the tiger, but being committed to that entanglement.
Well, I think that my vision is true, and I think that my story is valid, and I think that it's just much too late in the game and much too close in the millennium to continue to have these stories about these Anglo male Eastern Seaboard professional men having an identity crisis at age 50. And if you had a woman write that story, they wouldn't call it a bold quest for identity. They would say it's another neurotic housewife. But men are able to do it.
The only other thing that I think I want to ask about that particular aspect of it has to do with the market and the buyers and the readers. And once the readership comes into a certain sensibility or has a certain appetite for what they want to read, how long do you think that establishment will maintain, if it doesn't change, to more meet the desires of people who want to read books or who will read books?
You would think it would have changed by now, but I'm really not encouraged by what I see going on in New York with how many people are not coming in with literary backgrounds. They come in with sales backgrounds, and more editors in New York now acquire books. Very few editors will really work on books in a creative way. They just sort of buy a book and then they market it. So also I don't know that there are vast numbers of readers who want to read difficult books. male or female, part of a revolution or not part of a revolution. I think there's a real crisis now with people not turning to the word for solace the way they used to.
I somehow or another suspect this is a political agenda by some other name. That your revolution is very, very political, and that, I could just say more power to you.
Thank you.
And we wanted to, have you read some, so I think we're going to take a break now before we run out of time, and so we can get you reading some from your book. It's really been a pleasure to have you.
I'm so happy that you've had me.
Yeah. And I'm pleased that we have been able to delve into some aspects of your thoughts and your feelings and ideas about living the writer's life, living Kate Braverman's life. That's the important thing, I think. Yeah. And that hat is bad. So anyway, we're going to take a little break here, and then you'll read, and then...
Okay.
But I'll take this opportunity to say goodbye.
Well, bye.
Yeah, and I'll see you again sometime. Maybe you'll come back to our poetry festival in some future year.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I love Santa Barbara.
Great.
There is no more money for motels. We eat in the car now. We can't go to restaurants. People stare. We are wearing our road clothes, pants under our skirts. We have mosquito bites on our eyelids. We wear scarves around our necks. We put them over our mouths when we drive through dust. Now we look like bank robbers, and everything costs too much money, and there's nothing left to sell. This is what America has done for us. Don't cry, my mother says. Half the world goes to sleep hungry, and they have since the start of time. It is after Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, and Utah. I know California isn't a real destination. You can't get there from New Jersey, not simply by following a drawn line on a map. The process of arrival is more subtle and complex. It involves acts of contrition. You must appease the gods. You must find novel forms of penance. What are you thinking? I ask my mother. I'm thinking about money. She takes a sip from the bag she keeps on the car seat. The cops are only in the cities. We know that now, and it's almost her last pint of scotch. What's your favorite color? I ask. Green. What's your favorite food? That's easy, she says. Scotch. Do you believe in God? I need to know this. It is night. There are dogs barking. We are sleeping in the enclosed yard of a church. There are no nailed boards in the outlaw night where I have always lived without regret, my mother tells me. No, there is no God. Go to sleep. And my hand stays curled in the cool black air between us. We are crossing the final desert. The car has been sick since Colorado, and Roxanne drives slowly. We carry water in plastic jugs. Every 20 miles we stop and pour water in the radiator. It is the desert with its hexed plants called cactus. She has a pamphlet that names and describes them. She says she found it in the gas station, and I know she is lying.
That's all at our Channel 19 programming for today. We thank you for watching Community Access Television and hope that you will tune in again tomorrow.